Well, Wendy, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Amanda. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I want to first start off in getting a little bit of understanding about your background in IT. How did you get interested in IT and what was your first job?
Wow. I wasn't initially interested in IT. My very first job was for Ames Research Center. I was in the Student Space Biology Research Program, and I was a researcher working on cockpit displays of traffic information. And it was super cool and super geeky. And there wasn't much money in that. And I also didn't have the math skills to, truly be an astrophysicist. But while I was at that job, I was introduced to large scale computer systems and large scale networks. And at the time, this is back in the 1980s, there were not as many personal computers out there. So for me, this was just a revelation. And although I was interested in science and I was interested in math, what I was really interested in was these large scale systems. And so I just always, after that, sought out opportunities to learn about them, to be around them, to have something to do with large scale networks, large scale data centers, and so on.
That's great. I want to circle back to your interest in IT, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But before we move on, would you just tell me a little bit that make that connection and jump to your current role as CIO at Nutanix?
Sure. I've worked quite a few places, and as I my career progressed, I was really interested in having enough authority to be able to follow through on some ideas that I had for organizational structure and organizational design, for building out ecosystems of various vendor technologies. And so I knew, first of all, that I wanted to lead, that I wanted to be in charge of the organization. And then, secondly, that I wanted to work in an environment that was interesting to me technically. And so I came from just before coming to Nutanix, I was CIO at GoPro, the action camera makers. And I worked there because I was really interested in the tech and it was super fun. And then we were users of Nutanix technology at GoPro. And I was just so fascinated with this, kind of once in several decades technology that I wanted to be around it. And so um, when the then CEO reached out and said, "Hey, we need our first CIO. We've just gone public, and we need someone in that chair to move us forward." I said yes, and that was almost 5 years ago now.
You mentioned you were at the Space Biology Research Program at NASA Ames Research Center. And if I'm right, you were a junior in high school. Is that right?
I was a baby. I was young, and I'll tell you, I have my favorite story working there was I was very shy and I was a high school kid and I left high school every day to go to this place. And so I had to like study on the side, Um, and so I would take my lunch. My mom made my lunch, and peanut butter and jelly sandwich and an apple and some milk, and I would take my lunch and I went out to this construction site where they were building the 40 by 80 by 120 wind tunnel. And I would sit inside this just giant building and sort of disappear in the shadows. And every now and then, one of the visiting, pilots or researchers would come and kind of sit out there with me and have lunch because it was in the shade, just kind of private. And that's how I met some really interesting people like Chuck Yeager, for example. I sat there, had lunch
I
with.
met Chuck Yeager too. That's funny.
Yeah. Did you really? That's so cool. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we're just
I
not-
was
how did you meet
yeah,
him?
no, I went to the Indy 500 and he was one of the the guys in the pace cars. And so I got to have dinner with Chuck Yeager, but it was around the same time as well.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. So, I mean, I was just a nerd, and just fascinated with these systems. And I think, if I had to look back on what's driven me my whole career, it's just curiosity. I want to know how things work and why things work. And especially the more complex and large the system is, I want to be around it enough to know. I remember in that same vein, one of my first jobs was working as a cook for a nearby restaurant where they made these amazing fluffy Dutch baby breakfast dishes. And none of us could figure out, like, how do they do that? How do they do that? So I got a job there so I could learn how they do that, learn how to do it, quit the job. I could still make a good Dutch baby.
Oh. You mentioned earlier that you worked for GoPro. I know you worked at Yahoo and Cisco Systems. So when you look back at those amazing experiences that you have, is there a moment or a story you could share with us that's helped shape your career to where how you've gotten to be CIO that you can really point to?
Um, I've got a couple of people who were mentors for me. The first was a guy named Ethan Thorman at Cisco Systems. And uh, at the time, I was very set in my ways. I felt that there were right things and wrong things. And you'll see from how the two stories are related because apparently I haven't progressed much. But I remember Ethan walked me out to my car one evening after work, and he said, like, I just need to show you something. He said, you know, I'm gonna stand here and I want you to try to push me over. And so, the first time that I tried to push him over, he stood very, very rigid and hard, and I pushed really hard, and I could move him. Right, I could move him off of his stance. And then the second time, he relaxed, and when I tried to push him over, he just bent. He didn't move off of his stance. And he said, sometimes it's a stronger play to be flexible. And sometimes you can actually achieve what you wanted to achieve and stay in your stance by relaxing and listening and being aware of the situation and responding rather than reacting. And so that was a huge lesson for me. The second lesson was many years later. A guy named Tony Young, who was my first boss at GoPro. And Tony had this saying, he would stop me in my tracks. He would say, like, you like to be right, right? I would say, yes, yeah, yeah, and I am right. And he'd say, well, do you want to be right or do you want to be dead right? Nobody wants to be dead right. It's okay to be right, but you can give a little rather than dying on that hill. And so those were great lessons for me, just in terms of listening, being flexible, and ultimately leading by providing clarity, not specificity.
I hear that get a mentor, have mentors often when I talk with people, C-suite leaders as yourself, and even people who are just doing really well in the industry. So that's something I just want to call out for our listeners that that's such a key part of learning is the mentorship as well.
Yeah, and you got to be really stubborn to be my mentor. I want people to find me a mentor. I'm like, what's that person have that I don't have? But it's these strong leaders who are like, listen here, you need to hear this thing. That's made a big difference for me.
Absolutely. I want to switch gears and get a little tactical and dig a little deeper into some topics.
I'm trying to figure out tactics.
I read a quote from you, and I just want you to help me understand, and explain it a little bit. You said it was that you were talking about a digital transformation and about how you have delivered. You went from delivering 15% of Nutanix's service autonomously to well over 50%. Can you talk about those services, the process? Just really help me understand what the heart of what you're getting at there is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the journey that got us to that point is has two really important components. One is um, uh, being able to interact with infrastructure as code, and the second important component is being able to use natural language processing and machine learning tools. But it starts by saying, um, look, what are our services and how would we like to optimally deliver those services? And so in my organization, we realized that we could never keep up with just the pace of change, the complexity of the environments that we were responsible for, et cetera. And so we sort of decided to prioritize. So we prioritized in each functional area, the top five services. And for each of those top five services, we did two things. The first thing we did was we defined the FTR for each service. And so FTR stands for first time right. It comes from the lean programming space. And it essentially says, if I were to deliver this service right the first time, what would be the optimal workflow involved in doing that? And what would be the optimal interaction design? And so, for example, if you think about getting dressed in the morning, the optimal workflow for getting dressed is you put on your underwear, then your pants, then your shirt, then your socks, then your shoes. If you got that out of order, if you put on your shoes first, all the rest is messy and involves rework. And then secondly, thinking about the interaction design, you wouldn't want to be doing that on the bus on the way to work or in the train. You wouldn't want to be doing that in a snowbank. You'd want to be getting dressed indoors in your bedroom. And when it came time to put your shoes on, you'd want to sit in a chair so you wouldn't have to hop on one foot. And so for every service, we create a regular English language description of what is the FTR for delivering that service. Not, how are we doing it today, but what would be ideal in terms of operations and workflow. And then we measure every time that we deliver that service against that standard. And if we get all of it exactly correct, we score a one. If you miss even a tiny minuscule step of interaction design or operational flow, you score a zero. And so that's our quantitative measurement of essentially the efficiency of our work. And then over on the effectiveness side, we measure NPS for every service that we deliver. And so, we literally ask people who receive those services, whether they're autonomous or manual, how did you feel about that? How was that for you? We then stack rank all of our services from worst to best, and we prioritize the absolute worst, the ugliest, worst, terriblest. They wish us dead every time we deliver this service for modernization. And we modernize services in a 3-month agile cycle. So we have every quarter 3 monthly sprints. The first sprint is a documentation sprint. The second is an automation sprint, and the third is execution and cleanup. And so we take the worst things that are causing us the most rework and the most angst and frustration and lack of productivity in our employees, and we automate parts of those things. The last piece of the puzzle is we don't try to do monolithic things. We do very small things, tiny things. James Clear is a very influential author to me. He wrote something called Atomic Habits, where you can make huge changes by just learning or changing or doing one small thing at a time. And so there might be something with a 55-step process that makes it work, but there's 2 or 3 steps where we struggle. So we'll automate those 2 or 3 steps as a starting point. And every time that you apply automation to something that's not working well, you reduce the amount of rework that needs to be done. And that frees up capacity, which then allows you to automate the next thing and automate the next thing. And so, if we look at all of the work that we do, we separate it into 2 categories: planned work and unplanned work. Unplanned work is break fix stuff, incidents, issues, and so on. And it's the least efficient kind of work because it's the work where we're doing rework basically, and we're not sure what we're doing, and then it's causing context switching and so on. And so we apply all of our automation efforts to that work. And today we actually detect and address 89% of all of our unplanned work autonomously. And then a much smaller percentage of our planned work, we do planned maintenance autonomously. But really that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck in the unplanned work area. So literally, I think we are head and shoulders above any other IT department I've heard of in terms of this very, very high percentage of autonomous work. We use a bunch of tools to do that, and a bunch of other processes to do that. But that process I just described, that's it. That's the magic.
Wow. Can you give us an example of something you've automated during the pandemic that's been a huge positive for your employees and your company, even if
Yeah.
it's something small?
Absolutely. Our employees are in really, really mixed mode in terms of how they are accessing our systems, right? They might have been in the office one day and then the next day they're working from, home. And then maybe they're going and visiting somewhere for 3 months and working from there. They might be using, uh, different devices, et cetera. And so, this whole notion of recognizing devices, recognizing, new access requests, it was sort of this multi-step, process, and people would get themselves locked out of their passwords and, wait for days and struggle and be frustrated. And so we just automated the process of we have this tool we call XBot. It's a natural language processing enhanced tool that works via Slack. And so um, we just interact with employees about access controls that way. We say, hey, I noticed you got locked out. You've reset your password. You're done. Good luck. Have a nice day. Right. So we just notice what's happening and we proactively address what's happening. Of course, you got a bunch of cyber controls in there as well. But now instead of the employee having to say, oh no, I got locked out. I can't remember my password. I tried 3 times. I got to wait an hour, like all that. We bypass that. We interact with employees and that, regular English language conversation. And, I constantly, again, we get these NPS surveys. Just read one this morning from someone who said, I'm so happy I could cry. Like I did 3 stupid things. I added a new iPhone and, I forgot to change my password and I got locked out when it tried to auto connect. And, I was going to the most important meeting of my life and you guys just reached out, or the bot reached out and automatically reset the password. Thank you. Um, it's those little thing, right? Like almost no code to make that happen, but the interaction was much more favorable. We're also doing, we're an operating system company, so we have thousands of developers who are constantly wanting us to build custom versions of some sort of VM in some sort of cloud or a hardware, et cetera. And so we build all of those systems autonomously now, and we allow a lot of self-service and for developers to make some real granular choices that maybe you wouldn't normally see in these build environments. I mean, we run an Intel lab, or we run an AMD lab. We're pretty low level at the hardware level too, and so there's a lot of those builds that are automated now as well.
Right. How has the FTR, the first time right, how's that changed during the pandemic?
You know, I think this is a change. I'm fascinated with this. I think this is a change that is uh, maybe highlighted by the pandemic, but is also was already in play. And that is when I heard recently, I heard a statistic from I think McKinsey that says by 2026, about 58% of the people in tech jobs will either be Gen Z or millennial. And Gen Z and millennial folks expect a more consumer like, more personalized experience. Exacerbate that with us sitting home alone in our houses, thinking about what we need and want, what makes us comfortable, which is a very typical thing for us, right? And man, I have my very special version of the pomegranate pit water that I like. You know, at work they have mint water, but they're out of my pomegranate sometimes, and so we've become very need focused, very specialized focused, and so this is where something like automation and machine learning can bridge that gap between, the 5 tired people in IT or the 10 tired people in customer support and very, very special me. And so we're able to provide these, quite personalized, timely, in line with the workflow experiences and make it feel like it's personal. It's about me. I can choose exactly what I want and I can get that exact experience and that exact thing. And so um, I think we're never going to put the genie back in the bottle. It's like the example with the hint water. when I went into the office recently, it gave them they had hint water, but they did not have pomegranate, and I want my pomegranate. It's a little like that. We've gotten used to that. Even as we're working. I mean, I'm speaking to you, I'm using my gaming computer because I like the monitor like way better. Yeah, I'm not gonna bring my gaming monitor to work. And so, it's that specialness that I think we're able to address electronically, but is harder in a hybrid or real world mode.
Yeah. Want to talk a little bit about that idea of personalization, being really mindful of what the end user wants. I saw your presentation at Cohesion 2021 conference. You talked about A/B testing. I know the importance of A/B testing. I've done it when I was redoing an intranet to help with information architecture, where to place certain widgets on a screen. Help our audience understand the importance of doing A/B testing when rolling out something like an intranet. Like, what are some must dos and some best practices?
So um, data is power. Um, Data is so important. I have, I've heard many of my peers in many, many sessions and conversations complain that they, can't get permission to modernize something or to bring some, element of the company through digital transformation or, they want to upgrade something like the intranet, but they're struggling to get, buy-in or support, et cetera. And of course, we have to have good relationships, and we have to have, make deposits into emotional bank accounts, and we have to run a tight ship and a clean operation and all those things. But if you if you want to truly make change, if you want to truly make progress, then it helps to drive that progress with data. And so um, the challenge with setting up testing and collecting data is that you might discover that your, fondly held beliefs are untrue, right? And so, I think the hardest part about collecting data is building a fair test. Um, Honestly, because as soon as you endeavor to be fair and to be really, really fair, you're the ref on the field and you got a kid on each team, and you're calling the game, right? And you got to be fair on each side. As soon as you have that mindset, then you can create these tests. And then you're in a position to simply observe the results. And so you know, we work really hard in the beginning to set up these A/B tests in a way that's fair. We talk through the test design with lots of people who have passionate feelings to make sure we've sort of hunted down and killed any bias that we had anywhere in the test process. Um, and then there's some elements of testing that are very important. So the sameness thing matters, right? You want to create conditions that are as same as possible. If you can't do that, then you probably don't have the right test. Um, or you need to broaden the size of the test until sort of the sheer size of the data set outweighs some small anomalous differences. You have to truly observe and make sure that you're testing both the workflows and for lack of a better term, the emotions, the feelings about things. And so our tests that we ran, we tested for accuracy. We tested for timing, how long things took. We tested the same data, the same questions for all of our test groups. So we tested across geographies and age groups. We tested new employees and old employees to try to sort of weed out any bias that we had in the process. And then we also issued NPS surveys to everyone so that even if we thought, okay, the data indicates this, if people said like, yeah, that worked for me, it was completely accurate, and I hated it so much that I'm considering quitting. We need to discover that, right? Because you need the qualitative data as well as the quantitative data. And I've done this through multiple rounds in my career. I'm actually famous for A/B testing Zoom, WebEx. In the old days, Skype for Business, Link, Teams. I always run through extensive A/B tests of those collaboration tools because every company is a little different and all of the interactions are a little different. And I would say I've got, friends and horrified people in all of those companies because company after company, um, the tests actually turn out differently with different employee populations, and you have to be prepared for that.
Right. Right. I want to ask one more question, kind of related to all this, talking about Zoom technology. Because of the pandemic and the employee experience, where mostly a lot of people are working remote from their homes. There's, hybrid remote. But I want to talk about what you feel is technology's role in helping create company culture. It's different when you can go in the office and the idea of the water cooler, meeting leaders, having, more interactions with your colleagues or coworkers. So would you talk a little bit about what you see IT's role in now that we're in the pandemic of creating company culture, helping shape it?
So there's a couple ends of the spectrum. I'll start with the negative end of the spectrum. The negative end of the spectrum is that technology isn't a cure for cultural dysfunction. We need only spend time on TikTok or Facebook to see that um, in many cases technology can um, sort of disintermediate the authority figures and reveal people for the kind-hearted wonderful folks or the monsters that they are, right? And so there's nothing that I can do as a company CIO to to fix a broken or a toxic culture. Although I certainly have compliance responsibilities, I am responsible to ensure that technology is used in a way that is equitable, that is fair, and that is monitored. And so but beyond that, I mean, if there's something toxic and broken, for example, and this happens often, people will say like, well, team A is not sharing with team B. And so what we need a collaboration tool or we need an intranet tool. Look, if team A and team B aren't sharing, you will build for them a gold plated way not to share. If you build a super expensive, collaboration platform. And so it's not a substitute. On the other hand, um, we can be sensitive to the culture that exists and we can use technology to enhance and magnify elements of that culture that will help with the company's productivity and help with the company's desire to provide egalitarian access, et cetera. And so, one of our responsibilities as technologists is to understand the ecosystem that we're a part of and add healthy elements to that ecosystem, support the health of that ecosystem. So a great example there is one of the reasons why we chose Simpplr as an example for our intranet site. So we had a team of folks in the company who were sort of diehard Google users, right? They liked all of the collaboration tooling in Google, and they had years of documents and data and search and automation built into those environments, and it was very important to them. We had another group of users who were, sort of these, I mean, just die hard, like everything we do is in Slack. Slack is what we use for collaboration. We love that. I had a third group who were like, hey, it's Microsoft stuff no matter what. And so, if you think about, all right, how do you enable people in the first group to interact with content from people in the other groups? And how do you enable people in the other groups to interact with people in the first group's content without changing how they work? Because how they work is actually productive for them, delightful for them. in the past, IT has made mistake after mistake in this regard. IT will say, well, we've got to choose a standard. You can't have too many apps. Um, that's very outmoded thinking. And if I think about how I use my mobile device, for example, my personal device, I have multiple, um, you know, uh, apps on there, right? Multiple social networking apps on there. And I don't say like, well, I'm using Twitter, and so Twitter's my standard, therefore I can't use Instagram at all. It just wouldn't work for me. And that'd be ridiculous, right? I know when to use what app. And so um IT needs to treat our workers as grown-ups, right? And we need to understand these are whole people showing up at work. They know how to use apps productively. So, how do I narrow that in on choice of tools? Well, I need to find tools that have open APIs that are integrated with others. Ultimately, what I needed for an intranet is I needed sort of like that old fashioned portal idea, this idea that information is sitting where it needs to sit and in places that are productive for those who are using it, but we need to make it, findable, and we need to allow people to connect to it and search for it and add to it and interact around it without changing the in-place workflows. Um, Looking for and finding that sort of technology. I mean, man, we looked at many different intranet tools and technologies until we found one that essentially the architectural philosophy, the design philosophy of Simpplr matched our own need for how we enabled people to interact around content and to collaborate. And it didn't seek to replace the tools we already had or to be part of a larger platform per se, but rather fit into the ecosystem as a good player in the ecosystem. You've got to insist on that and look for that and understand how all those elements matter in the choice of a technology or a tool.
I'm just curious, at Nutanix, who governs the Simpler platform that you use? We always talk about, is it engagement slash internal comms? Is it IT? Is it HR? Who owns that at Nutanix?
That's interesting. So we have enabled every person in the company to be able to publish their own pages, to be a publisher, a content creator, to govern those pages and those environments, to comment and collaborate. IT supports the technology, corporate communications encourages the content. There's some award winning content, and they seek out interaction and content creators. But I would say that we all do.
Right. I'm going to move into our last segment, Wendy, asking for a friend.
Hey,
So I want to start
asking
off
for a
and just
friend.
say, you've got an amazing work history. You're clearly very well versed in IT, and I love hearing your stories. But I want to talk about non-work activities. What's a hobby or a non-work activity that you enjoy, that makes you better your job in an indirect way, or that maybe something you would recommend for our listeners?
Oh my goodness. Um, I enjoy challenges. I enjoy physical challenges. I enjoy mental challenges. I would just sit around and do nothing unless somebody throws down. If somebody says like, hey, I can do this faster than you, or there's no way that you can, run 200 miles in, 100 days, or whatever it is, then I'm in. And so um, right now, at the moment, I'm in the midst of the Fall Pumpkin Challenge. And in the midst of this Fall Pumpkin Challenge, I must bake a completely new, from scratch pumpkin dish every weekend of fall. And the additional piece of the challenge is these are gluten free and dairy free things, and my family must love them. Then I have to post about it. And so, that is taking all of the mental bandwidth. And it's also sort of teaching me to be very structured about the whole process too. You've got to get the right things at the grocery store if you're going to end up with something that the family's eaten by, close of business on Sunday.
Right.
So I don't know if that was what you're hoping for, but it's all a fall pumpkin challenge right now.
No, I love that. I once made a gluten-free, dairy-free pumpkin pie,
Yeah.
and
Good
it was
for
really good.
you. You,
Yeah, it was
you,
really good. So
you
there's an idea for you if you need one.
I need a recipe is what I need.
Yeah, I may send you something. As a female leader in IT, what's a significant barrier you've encountered and how did you overcome it?
I haven't encountered any barriers that were explicit to me being a female in IT. Um, I would say that any position in leadership has, requires you to pass barriers to reach that position. And technology is one of those domains that has a lot of men in the ranks and in a lot of men in positions of authority. Um, but I've always sort of viewed that as being, um, accidental, circumstantial, as opposed to some giant plot that's against me. So I've just always showed up with my own interests and my own ambition and my own passion, and then try to be cognizant of someone else who's on that journey, and hopefully that's encouraging to folks. I I will tell you, it isn't until right about now in my career, when I got into my 50s, that people started saying to me like, "Oh, look at you. You're both female and senior and in technology. Like, what a snowflake you are. Like, how on earth did that happen?" And it happened kind of randomly. I mean, please don't copy what I did. You would hate it. So I would say there aren't barriers per se. And in fact, I loved the way that John Madden talks about these things. I think I have an unfair advantage being female, especially nowadays. Um, you know, there's this sort of desire to, hey, we need to have, females in leadership. We need to have females on boards. And um, guess what? I happen to be extremely qualified, and I'm also female. If that gets me in the door, if that gets me the interview, it's like any other unfair advantage. Somebody. So I'm very, I'm very happy, very blessed to be female. I will say, just recently, someone at work told me that she was moved to tears when she looked at my calendar, which I make public. And on my calendar, I have these blocks of time I call kid time, where I spend time with my kids. And she said, I never had the courage to show that. I always felt like if I ever showed kid time on my calendar, people would go like, "Oh, she's like a mom." And I'm like, I am a mom. Like, I can't not be a mom. It doesn't make me like any less of a badass technologist, or, any less of like, your board member who's asking you what to do. But man, I am also a mom. I'm female. I'm in love with my husband. We're all showing up differently, right? So I can't be someone I'm not. And I think
Right.
that's a big deal. You just got to show up and be yourself.
Yeah, and I'm glad, even, from me myself, when I've seen instances like that, it sort of empowers me then to do it as well.
Mhm,
So I think that's great. And I can understand where she's probably coming from to see
mhm,
people do that. And also during the pandemic, I'll see coworkers with their babies and meetings and the little pack thing. And I
yeah,
love it. I think it's fantastic that we're really changing that quite a bit. I
yeah,
remember 10 years ago, oh, so and so gets to leave early every day because they go pick up their kids from work. That's not fair. And I feel like the conversation has really changed around
mhm.
personal life and work and blurring those lines quite a bit, which I'm really loving.
And it's people centered now. This is the part that I don't think we're going to go back, especially with Gen Z, right? Gen Z, the individual generation. It starts with, you know also understanding that my interest these days is around productivity. How are we most productive? And many studies show that we're most productive we start from a foundation of happiness.
Hmm.
And so, we've got to find the environments and the work modes and the tooling and the interaction design that enable employees to be happier as they work, that reduce that friction. That's different for everyone, and it's even different for you and I, Amanda, at different stages in our life. What would make me happy with the baby in arms is not at all what would make me happy now.
Right. Right. Well, we're running low on time, but I have one more question I want to ask you before you go. What do
Okay,
you see as the next big shift in IT over the next 5 to 10 years?
interesting. I think that um, we will need to figure out um, effective ways to reduce context switching. Um, we've we've broadened the context in which we work, and so we're talking about not technology generally, but IT specifically, using technology to enable productive work and business outcomes. The big challenge we have in a world that is increasingly hybrid is reducing the effect of context switching on user productivity. And so, we have one of two choices. We can either change, human physiology and human beings, or we can change how we are using technology to enable workflow. And so I think we're going to focus a lot on that second one because we can measure the effects of reducing context switching, reducing the hybrid tax on human beings. We can measure those effects on productivity.
Great. Wendy, this has been a lot of fun and very amazing. I am really enjoying hearing your stories. But before I let you go, is there anything you would want our listeners to know about that we didn't cover today?
I would say that one of the most important things these days um, is to understand that as knowledge workers, we have the ability to learn anything we need to know. You should never let lack of knowing something be a barrier. Even if you're slower than everyone else, that's okay. It took me almost 9 years to get my bachelor's degree because I kept failing key classes. I kept having to drop out and work. It was a long haul. Um, who cares, man? Look at me now. And so, take the time you need. You have the ability to learn this. It's a bit of a journey. New technology will come along. There'll be new things to learn. There'll be new norms. And you know what? When the time comes, assuming that you still have your brain, even if your brain's slower than the average person is, like mine sometimes is, doesn't matter. It's not a race. You will be able to figure this out. You will find ways to learn. You will find ways to have mastery. And this is the age of knowledge workers, of disintermediation, of reward for mastery, value for knowledge. And so you're entering an amazing, amazing time where you can show up with all of your knowledge and all of your skills and be valued and rewarded for that.
Yeah, I wish we had another half an hour just to dive into that advice, Wendy. That's fantastic. Where can our listeners find you if they want to reach out?
So my middle initial is M. So it's a Wendy M. Pfeiffer. You can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Wendy at Nutanix.com is my email address. But look for the M. My mom's middle name, my middle name, my daughter's middle name. They're all Michelle. And so we use the M to identify ourselves as part of a legacy of wonderful women. And so just remember the M and you can find me anywhere.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much for sharing today and joining me. This has been great.
Thank you, Amanda. It was a pleasure.